So I'm sorry I wasn't able to make it last year. I got stuck on 81, so I got wise this time and came 33. What a beautiful drive. If you come from Richmond, anybody take 33? Oh my gosh, it's like, why didn't I discover that before? I had two kids go to JMU too and didn't even ever think to take that. So I want to talk about a little bit about predictors of injury. Maybe you guys give you some ideas on what to look for. Computer going to sleep. And your kids as they come in the fall, and maybe to help prevent injury. So if you can predict it, we can help prevent it. So that's the idea. So there we go. Are you going to try to just keep up with me if I forget to say switch? All right. This was a really good study, one of the more recent ones, on injury rates in cross-country runners, and we all know that they can be pretty high. The ranges for boys, it's 26 to 48%, and girls 34 to 47. Interestingly, per 1,000 exposure hours, which is a more accurate assessment of like injury rates instead of just pulling out percentages, almost 13 injuries per 1,000 hours of exposure or running for boys, and up to 18 for girls. So significantly higher injury rates in high school girls. And I don't know, is that something you guys, I don't know if that's something you all notice in general, but I think that's consistent with what I see in the practice. So some categories of injury, next slide. Biomechanical, you have biomechanical causes, you have the history of a previous injury. That's the number one predictor of injury, is a history of an injury. That's across the board. They keep doing these studies and they keep coming up with pretty much the same thing. That's the number one. But running form can be a factor, and then of course training schedule or training errors that the kids might make over the summer. So we'll talk a little bit about the biomechanical first. You guys heard of the Q angle? It's that angle between the femur, up at the top of the hip, and the tibia. So basically, it's the angle that your quads function on and affect the knee. So a really high Q angle functionally kind of looks like this, all right? A really low Q angle would be more varus, the opposite. An average is a slight angle. Under 20 degrees is ideal. Girls will tend to have a higher Q angle than boys. Some people think that's one of the reasons girls get injured more, because of this higher Q angle. It does puts bad stress on the knee if you got a really big Q angle. The ones who have that knee pain right behind the kneecap, that's often caused because of biomechanical stress of a high Q angle. In these kids, you'll see circumduction when they run. You'll see that foot kind of swing out because of the angle. But there's another reason that's real common that causes that. If you see circumduction, do you try to fix that typically in the kids? Some coaches will, some coaches won't. Sometimes you just say, oh, that's just the way they run. Occasionally, it would be valuable to fix it, okay? And one of the reasons, if the hip flexor was injured at some point and it got weak, they'll use this muscle over here called tensor fasciae lata. It's a hip flexor also, but it's more lateral, okay? For them to engage it, what will happen is that the hip will turn in and then the leg will swing around. This is particularly true if you see it just one-sided. It's something that's likely fixable and should be fixed because they've developed a bad pattern. When we're injured, you guys probably know this, if you tell your body to run, it's going to figure out a way to run, right? And that's where you see compensatory patterns and stuff like that. When you can't fix this circumduction is if it's coming from the hip. And the easiest way to test that is you lie somebody down on the floor and you measure this angle here, internal, external rotation. I don't know if you can tell, but I got about 45 degrees each direction. Okay, that's normal, 45, 45. If you see that leg go all the way, the foot go all the way to the floor in one direction, and almost no in the other direction, that's coming from the hip. It's called an aneverted hip. And that will cause them to swing their legs around. If you try to fix it, you might mess up their hip. It's just the way the leg's going to function. So just kind of be aware.
You say fixable. Is that simply maybe a shoe or a
Thank you for the question. Yeah, fixable through form drills. Like, you'll see it when they're doing their skips. You'll see them kind of doing this. So you can do form drills. I'll lean them up against the wall and have them do that just high knee hip drive and train them in the sagittal plane. Give them mirror feedback so they can watch that leg, going straight up and down rather than circumducting around. So it'd be more just drills to try to untrain that compensatory pattern. And the other thing would be to strengthen the hip flexors, because there's a reason they're doing that is because they're weak. And that, the high knees and hooking into a band and working resisted drive, hip drive like that to train that hip drive. Okay, another biomechanical problem is excessive and prolonged pronation. We used to think this was always a problem, but pronation, as you guys probably know, is a very important part of biomechanics of running. If you don't have pronation, you don't have good shock absorption. So historically, we've typically overcorrected it. The motion control shoe is like for almost everybody, But now I think we know neutral shoes are usually the best. They're more comfortable, they're lighter. The only time it's a problem is if somebody is like Gumby, super flexible, and they just can't support their arch. So when they load it, the whole foot just flattens out and it stays flat. Be aware, though, that a low arch, a flat foot, by itself does not mean they're overpronating, okay? So what overpronation is you see an arch, whatever the height it is, whether it's high or low, and they load it, and then through their loading, it pancakes way down, and they don't recover as they stride through. That's what overpronation is. It has nothing to do with the height of the arch per se, except it's the change of the height of the arch from non-weight bearing to weight bearing, then you're pronating. So I say that because it's often misunderstood. When you see a flat foot kid, you think they need overpronation shoes. They need motion control. No, they might have a stiff, flat foot. You want them in a neutral, comfy, shock absorbing shoe. And the other thing is some shoe manufacturers, running shoe stores have these foot scanners. And it's a big sales pitch. They have the kids stand statically, and then that thing measures where their arch is, and then they are recommended orthotics or shoes based on that static scan. It is not related to function at all, and I think and I've seen some people get hurt being overcorrected because of the foot scan. So just be aware of that, that a lot of these shoe stores, especially the bigger ones, Fleet Feet's one that has they try to upsell the orthotics. So they've got a lot of good shoes, and there's knowledgeable people there, but just maybe warn the kids not to get upsold orthotics if they're not having any issues and don't really need it. Any questions on pronation? Sometimes that hits. So I talked a little bit about I already talked about what is pronation, and really the key is, are they at terminal stance, are they getting that heel back over? Is that arch coming back up? If it is, they're probably fine. Even if it looks like it's falling far over. Okay, so hip abductor weakness has been associated with recurrent injuries, IT band syndrome in particular, but also runner's knee or anterior knee pain, very common in adolescent females, where if you've got weakness here compared to their body, the guys too, they've just gone through this big growth spurt. Now they got this long lever arm they got to control. The muscles haven't caught up yet. So a lot of y'all probably do those band walks, and work that outer hip. Those are key to preventing injury. And if somebody has weakness on that one side, they'll be much more prone to injuries on that side. And one of the tests for it, one of the best tests, just a one-legged squat. If they stand up and they go back down and do a squat, and you see that pelvis collapse on one side and not on the other, they've got one-sided weakness. Or if both sides collapse, they're weak on both sides. So that's a good test to see if they're ready for running, if they've got the strength in the hips to tolerate running. So this was an interesting study. I think it was published, 2018. They found that they through biomechanical analysis, they measured knee stiffness, they called it, okay? And that is the ability to basically absorb the impact of running. So they're running along, boom, is their knee absorbing it and then coming back off? If they're running almost peg leg, where they're not absorbing very well, they called that knee stiffness. And that was associated with a higher rate of injury, especially stress injuries, because they weren't shock absorbing very well. And the knee joint itself can get a lot of stress if they don't have the appropriate strength or ability to absorb down. You'd have to almost videotape somebody. It's kind of hard to see if somebody's absorbing. You want to see 30 to 40 degrees of knee flexion, and particularly in a distance runner. So something to be aware of. The strength training is the key for that. Powerlifting. Plyometrics is really good for developing good shock absorption, because that not only gives you good shock absorption, but then you get that explosive power back off the ground. So do you guys do plyometrics for distance runners, not just your sprinters? Excellent. Very, very important for not just performance, but I would say for injury prevention, because when they're going all out at the end of a race, or even in the middle of a run, distance running has a big power component. Every time they hit the ground, they need to get off that ground and travel a good distance for efficient and effective running. When you do, just a little side note, plyometrics, I'm only bringing this up because I have a patient now who told me the coach likes to do them at the end of practice or maybe after the long run. Just FYI, it's generally better to warm up, do your plyos first. You want those muscles as fresh and ready to go to get the most out of that plyometric workout. So it's just like strength training. You're going to get a lot more out of your set when your muscles are recovered, right? If you're working on your bench and you work a heavy set, you need to rest 3 minutes for that next set to be effective, okay? If you don't rest enough, you're not going to get much out of it. So the same kind of applies for plyometrics, for developing power. You want those muscles fresh. I think it'll probably help prevent the injury. There is an injury risk of working plyometrics. So consider that in your order of training, plyos before the long distance work. The ability to develop power comes pretty fast, right? You can develop it in a couple weeks of working plyos. You can lose your power measurements in less than a week, 3 to 5 days. So off-season, plyometrics probably would be good to do twice a week, so you can keep developing without losing. And in-season, probably once a week would be wise to keep incorporating some plyometrics, because you lose power if you don't train it every week. It's really interesting. Cardiovascular fitness can linger 3 to 4 weeks if you stop everything, but plyos you lose real fast, or power, just FYI. All right, here's some examples of plyometric exercises: squat jumps, jump lunges, and these are kind of in order of difficulty. Squat jumps would be two-legged, and you guys know the important part of the plyometric is not just a good soft landing, but how short a time there is between the landing and then the takeoff. the amortization period. It's got to be really short. It's like just immediately off. So train your kids when they're doing plyos to get the most out of it. It's like you're jumping on hot coals. You hit down, boom, you got to get right back off. But this is a good order. So if you're starting with maybe younger kids who aren't as well trained, squat jumps and jump lunges. Can you go back to examples of plyometric? Or go to the next one, maybe it was. There we go. So jump lunges, hops with 2 legs, and then the next level, of course, hopping with 1 leg, a little more difficult. Depth jumps, standing on a box, dropping off, and then exploding off the box. Next level up. Doing real quick feet on a step. And then the hardest thing that I see you guys do, and I love seeing track athletes do one-legged bounding. That's such an amazing thing, taking off. But 2-legged bounding, going from one leg to the other. And then, of course, the hardest, I think, is one-legged bounding, or maybe high hurdle overs, hopping over the hurdles. Do you guys have any others that you like to do? Yes?
What about the surface? When we did them indoors, we had small wrestling mats. Went out about 40 feet, so we would do them on the old wrestling mats. But outdoors, sometimes we could go to the park and we could do them in the sand volleyball pit. Is there any advantage or disadvantage or do's or don'ts?
My understanding with plyometrics is you want to get as much out of the ground as you can to get the most out of it. So if you're on a soft surface, you're actually, the surface is taking some of that energy. So they're not getting as much out of it.
So we would have been better off getting on the regular floor?
Yeah, regular track or gym floor, yeah. Okay. I wouldn't want to do them on concrete, but gym, wood floor, a regular track, I think would be ideal. Yeah, if you're too soft, you're not getting that explosiveness out of it because of the landing. And that's one of the arguments against the really soft, fat shoes too. Are you losing, your explosiveness, your feel for the ground if you're in like a Hoka, which is, with a 30 or 40 millimeter stack height. Yep. And again, being real quick, you could do it like this, absorb, push, or it's, explode off real quickly. That's a real good one too, to get the lateral, especially if running trails, you want to have that lateral stability and quickness, cutting. So that's a good one. All right, next one, Y balance. Have you guys ever heard of the Y balance test? They did a study to see if balance and coordination related to injury prediction. And they did find that, so if you could do it with just 3 cones. You could put a cone here and a cone there, put strips of tape, and you basically just kind of slide out as far as you can, and you can measure the distance, how far they go, and slide out, and then slide out. So actually, that's right, it's 2 back. You could do it front or back. 2 back like that, and 1 in the front. So if they had an asymmetry, if the runner had an asymmetry, meaning they could go, say, 40 centimeters this way, but only 30 on this one, that predicted a potential injury. So there was something wrong with that one ankle. A 2-legged squat is a pretty good screener too, to see how low they can get, how far the knees can get out, and are both feet flat on the floor, or if they're elevating, are they elevating symmetrically? Because this little test is really a test of balance, but also ankle mobility, if they can get their knee forward over their toes. And then the other one was this crossover, which is a big balance and mobility test. So some level of balance testing or challenge your kids' balance, I think, could be really helpful. If you're doing some upper body work, have them stand on one leg in their socks, and you're doing dumbbell work. When you're doing squats, one-legged squats are excellent for runners because that gets those glutes working. Of course, even if you want to load them, you can put them in a squat rack, and especially like a Smith machine. and you can do that one-legged to get the balance piece. So incorporate one-legged stuff as much as you can, and that'll help prevent asymmetries, but also work on balance and core control. So that's the next slide, yep. So we talked about that. One of my favorite ones, I'll just show you this. The three-plane core ball. I don't have a weight, but this will be my weight. So basically, you're going to lean. You have a 4 to 10-pound ball, depending on how good a shape they're in, and you tip in different planes of motion. So the first one will be way out. Hold each one for like 3 seconds, and then you can imagine if I got a weight extended out there, it's a really good just kind of core training day. Get them a med ball or something that weighs 8-10 pounds, and it's good, especially in their socks, making those intrinsic foot muscles work. It's one of my favorite ones I'll do with runners, especially if they've had any kind of biomechanical problems. Okay, so we'll talk about previous injury and how to prevent the previous injury from being the number one cause of their next injury. So one of the things is right after the injury, I know you guys aren't doctors, and some of the kids might go to a doctor, or their parents might be a doctor, but we're very medication-oriented in this country. And there's more mounting evidence that an anti-inflammatory in the first 2 to 4 days in particular after an injury, shin splint, tendonitis, whatever, is going to slow the healing process down. Inflammation is an amazing system to initiate the healing process. So I'm going to talk to the kids about this a little bit too, because it's like inflammation and pain is like an alarm system, right? We're being warned, hey, something's wrong. Imagine if you had a fire alarm in a sprinkler system that went off, and you just turned the noise off because it was annoying, it was bothering you, right? The fire's still going to go, right? You might even turn the sprinklers off because all the noise is just bothering you, so you turn it off, and the fire keeps going, right? So inflammation is like trying to put out the fire. It's noisy, it's trying to save people, it's trying to help you, but it's putting out that fire. It's taking away the damaged tissue, and immediately afterwards, it's bringing in the tissue, the cells to heal that tendon or whatever's injured. So that first week is the most important. Let it ride out. Put ice on it. Take Tylenol, but don't take any of the NSAIDs in that first week or so. So the more I feel like we educate our athletes on that, the better. Because I really feel like a lot of these chronic shin injuries and stuff, they get pumped with anti-inflammatories, and they're never allowing the healing process to carry out. And the other thing I think that would help the injury to be less impactful is to not let them stop everything. Cross-train, exercise, cardio, blood flow helps healing. Unless there's a bone sticking out the side of the leg, put them on a bike, on an elliptical machine, in the pool, whatever they can do that does not aggravate the condition is therapy for it. So the more they do to prevent losing their own conditioning and movement, keep the body moving, that all will help heal it quicker and heal it more thoroughly. And then, of course, the other, the biggest one is not letting them get back too soon. So again, avoiding pain medicine and everything will help because it's cueing them appropriately. Are they ready? So they're not masking the pain with medicine. And then, being really smart about the progression, the return to run program. The more gradual, if it's a bone injury, you got to be very gradual. You got to take about 6 weeks to build their miles up. The IT band and tendonitis, that's really injury specific. Some take longer than others. But testing symmetry, again, like we talked about, if that injured leg never fully recovers, they're going to be more prone to injuring it again. So when they're on the recovery phase, if they can't run with the team, have them do some one-legged squats and one-legged calf raises and working out with the trainer in the school to help rehab that leg. So there was a researcher at VCU in Richmond named Blaze Williams. I think he's with Nike now. But he put together this, running readiness scale. And he's been progressively doing more and more research. His PhD students are now doing studies, and they're finding it to be a pretty reliable test. And I think validity, it still needs some more work to show that it's truly valid. Like if you pass this test, you're not going to get hurt. I don't think that's been shown yet, but it's kind of leaning that way. It's pretty good test for just to see if your kid's ready. You know, if they came off a injury, the doctor says, yep, based on the injury, he's ready to go. This could be a little handy tool you could run them through. It's objective to see, you know, can they do this? Everything's for a minute, hopping, and everything's for form too. So, you know, if they're hopping and their legs are going in, or they're, you know, not getting up very good, then, you know, they may not be ready. They should be able to hold a plank for 60 seconds. Step-ups are just like it sounds. You want about a 12-inch box, and they're at a rapid rate, 60 per minute, 1 per second. They do 30 leading with one leg, then 30 with the other. And then the single leg mini squat, that's probably the biggest one that's going to really rule people out. It's doing it in a 80 count, down and up. And they don't need to go real deep. You want to go about the depth of what they would be running. So 40 degrees is plenty. It doesn't need to be super deep. And they should have balance. They shouldn't be dropping their pelvis and falling all over the place. And then the parallel wall sit, which is that guy there with the ball, just be able to hold it for 60 seconds. Any questions on that? Just something that might be a tool to see if your kids are ready. And I've talked about this before, and you guys probably know, this has been out there. Cadence is an important topic for injury prevention, and you want them over 174-ish, 170, 174, and that course depends on if you've got a 10-minute miler, they're probably not going to be at 174 unless they're real short, but the majority of your runners should be above in the 170s to 180 cadence. If they're real slow, down below 164, they have a higher rate of stress injuries, like shin splints and stress fractures. And this is something I've noticed in my practice when I videotape runners. This is a fairly common problem on injured side, causing IT band problems and hip dysfunctions. And I don't know where it comes from, if it's running on the track, always turning left, because it does seem to be the left leg that tends to cross over more than the right. But if they're running, straight ahead and you see one leg come under like that, or alternately both, it's rarely both, because that would just trip you up. But one leg comes under, and then you go here, and then you come under, and then that leg, the pelvis is going to really drop on that side, because that's a horrible angle to come in for that glute to work. So you'll see big pelvic drop, and everything associated with it, biomechanical knee pain, IT band problems, etc. So kind of be aware of that. That's, again, a training, drills, training. You'll see it. It'll show up in their A-skips. They'll be coming up like this. That one leg will just kind of up and in. They're running down the track. You'll see if you run them next to a line, you'll see them crossing over that line. So one of the drills I have them do is literally just run right down the line. You want to make sure the right foot hits just to the right of the line, then the left foot hits just to the left of the line. And they can use that as a guide. So training errors, you try to get your kids prepared over the summer. Make sure they're running. Surprisingly, they actually did a study to see if kids preparing over the summer if they didn't prepare over the summer, if they had a higher rate of injury than the kids who did. If you take simple yes, no answer, did you run over the summer? Yes. And compare to the group that said no, there really wasn't a big difference, surprisingly. I don't know why that. Statistics are funny, you know. But there was a pretty big N. They had, how many? 421 athletes. But what was interesting is if they had, let's see, the summer training, if it was less than 8 weeks long, they were more prone to injury. If they didn't mix it up between short and long days during the summer training, if they didn't have variety in their training schedule, they were a little more prone to injury. And then the last thing is if the kid's an absolute masochist and just runs hills all the time, they had a higher rate of injury. Or maybe they live in a real hilly neighborhood and they're just constantly going up and down hills. They had a slightly higher rate of injury. So I think the bottom line message is, you know, making sure they have variety over the summer. They're not just pounding, 8 miles 5 times a week, the same exact route. Variety is the spice of life. I'm sure you guys do that, but I thought that was kind of an interesting study, that if you just take the yes and no's, that didn't really reveal higher injury rate. These are a list of common injuries related to speed. So track athletes, sprinters, more likely to have these injuries on the left. Next slide. Over on the left, more speed-related, hamstring pulls, that type of thing happens with our sprinters. And then you get more distance overuse type injuries on the right, just as an FYI. More traumatic kind of ballistic injuries with the speed guys. And, of course, doing a track workout with a distance. They might develop an Achilles tendon problem or something like that. So, tight calf muscles is a very common cause of a lot of biomechanical problems in kids because they're growing, especially the boys. Muscles aren't keeping up. So incorporating regular stretching. And next slide. Hey, Matt, next slide. Thanks. So propping the foot up like that is, I think, the best way to stretch. If they could find something like that. If you lean up against the wall and do kind of the typical stretch like that, you're going to see 90% of them cheating. The foot will turn out and the arch will pancake down. And they're not getting the stretch out of their calf. It actually will look like that if you can see me. So if you don't really have a good option to prop the foot up like this, coach them to turn that leg in and then raise the arch before they lunge into the stretch. Real important to target that gastroc muscle in the calf. If you don't, all they're doing is pancaking their foot and actually stretching their plantar fascia, which you probably don't want to do. The plantar fascia doesn't need that kind of extra stretching. Just a little side note. I think find a good way, even a vertical wall, anything like that is the best way. Of course, gluteal strengthening is always valuable for helping to prevent injury. And if you have an athletic trainer on staff and you've got a runner who's, doing this thing, have them screen to see if they have the anteverted hips for that hip rotation I was telling you about. If they do have a really big Q angle, and this is I only do this, and did he move to the next one? Oh. So, can you go back to the last one, Matt? If they do have a really big Q angle, orthotics can actually help the mechanics of that a little bit. You just don't want it, you got to be real careful not to overcorrect. But if somebody's having a lot of anterior knee pain and they've got that big Q angle, just putting a little extra something in the shoe can actually help the knee pain. That's been shown. It's usually the adolescent female, big Q angle, and they're still growing and they're not controlling their leg very well. The little extra support in the shoe sometimes can help. So that's what I talked about, functional Q angle. The physical Q angle is just the measurement of the bone. Functional is if I collapse, now I've got an increased functional Q angle like this just because I'm not controlling my leg. Any questions about that? So now running form, talked about that already, higher cadence, midfoot striking, and avoid crossing over. Summer training, we talked about that. Making sure your athlete is ready. That's that little running screen you could do that Blaze put together. If the running, next, go a couple slides up so you get the graph. One more. There you go. So if the running demand is high and the preparation is low, they're gonna get hurt, right? So you want to make sure the athlete is prepared for that demand, for the demand you're going to put on them, and that's common sense and logical. But I think this is a good little chart to kind of have in your mind to make sure the athlete is prepared. So, next slide, last one. Any questions? Thoughts, comments? Appreciate your attention and